mostly endorse. You talk about the real estate business. Real estate business itself isn't a business, it's an industry. In fact, thinking about somebody like Jeff and a few of the others have mentioned, I'm not sure which is part of which. Is real estate part of the construction industry or is construction part of the real estate industry? Because they have to go hand in hand. If you're going to build something, you're building it on somebody's property. It's just that simple. And so, real estate industry is as large as you want to imagine it being. We talk about the construction industry being one of the largest industries other than healthcare. In fact, until recently, until we all started getting so old for some reason, construction industry was the largest industry of the country. Now, due to demographic shifts and economic challenges, construction has slowed down and is a much smaller part of our gross domestic product and other economic activity. But the amount of real estate still is there, right? Whatever the property is there, it exists, just being used in different ways from time to time. So real estate is enormous. There's a lot of real estate activity that isn't necessarily done by licensees, but we're going to focus mostly in this class on brokerage, or the real estate agency part of the business. So what does a broker do? A broker's a facilitator, bring people together, bring deals, make deals happen. Right? I mean, I'm not even going to use the word sales in there. As Calvin mentioned, 5 years ago, the entry license was real estate salesperson. That license class doesn't exist. The entry license is this, the real estate broker. Because you're really not kind of sell somebody something they don't need, or except if you're dealing with people who don't understand tax benefits of real estate ownership, like first-time home buyers, that sort of thing. You're really not trying to sell somebody on an idea. In most cases, people have already figured it out. So you're facilitating transactions. It's a great way to sell. Somebody already knows, yeah, I want to buy a house. Great. They're excited about it. You can be excited about it with them. You just got to be there to facilitate that transaction to help make the whole thing happen. So that's really what we're looking at doing. It's a licensed activity. More and more and more government agencies are regulating all kinds of things. And so this has been a licensed activity in various parts of the country now for more than a century. And so in Illinois, that's what we're looking at here, getting a license so that you can go out and charge money to act as a facilitator of transactions for people, whether it's lease transactions, sales transactions, or whatever the case may be. Other things that you can do in the real estate business that are different from this in terms of licensure or education in part would be things like appraisal. We're going to talk a little bit about real estate appraisal 3/4 of the way through the course approximately when we get to chapter 19. I was licensed as an appraiser for a couple of years in Illinois. I never used my license. I literally just wanted to take the coursework and go through the process because one of the colleges I taught at taught appraisal courses at the time, so I wanted to see what that was like. So if you're considering that, I have a pretty good idea of what that would be like, and I would be happy to talk to you about it more. There's a significant difference between appraisal business, part of the business, and the broker part of the business, and that's something we'll cover a little bit in our careers night, just kind of talk about those kinds of things. Property management is not necessarily a licensed activity per se. However, if you collect rent or you convey space to another party, which is really leasing, but in residential, like apartments, it's leasing and property management altogether. If you do those things, you have to have a broker's license in Illinois. Hence, people think of property management as requiring a broker's license. Again, we'll define throughout the course when can I do property management without a license and when do I have to have a license. In most cases, you're probably going to have a license. That's not always true, but it's not, the term property management or property manager is not actually listed in the License Act. It's the idea of collecting rent from tenants and or conveying the space that's being leased. That's where the license comes in and is required. Some states, since Samantha asked about going to another state, some states property management is not licensed at all, or like Illinois, it's licensed under the Broker Act, or it's got a separate statute altogether. So if you're going to go somewhere else, you may find property management is treated a little bit differently from a licensure standpoint. Financing, a couple of you mentioned mortgage loans, either originator, processor, that kind of thing. There is some licensure required now for being involved in that. We'll talk a little bit about real estate financing, and some of what you'll learn in this class will relate to basic mortgage lending principles and things that if you want to get a mortgage loan originator license, for example, that would take some additional study of things we're not going to have time to cover. It's important to know enough about finance to get your buyers through it because very few people pay cash. So as we'll look at later in the course, financing is a big part of what we do because these are big ticket purchases, these houses, townhouses. I was looking at an email I got today, I think it was from Crane Chicago Business, the real estate section. They were just listing the top 10 hotel sales in Chicago for the last year. The highest one was like $112 million. You can bet the investors who purchased that property didn't pay cash for it. If you have $112 million, you want to invest it in as many different things as you can to leverage that money to get the best returns you can, particularly in an upward moving market, as real estate has tended to be over the last several years. So financing isn't just, you know, borrowing 100 grand so you can buy your house. For some people, it's figuring out how can I borrow $80 million so I can buy this hotel. Or in the case of BlackRock, what did they pay for Willis Tower? $1.3 billion, which I'm pretty sure actually could have been a cash sale because they had just sold an $8 billion industrial portfolio a few months before that. So anyway, financing can be a pretty big part of what we do. We'll talk a little bit about subdivision, though I doubt you get a subdivision-ish question at the state exam or on the final, but we will talk a little bit about this idea. One of the things we do with real estate is we take the land the way it is and we alter it, right? We add value. We're trying to add value. This is the role of a developer or a subdivider. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Again, as a broker, you mostly want to facilitate the sales or the leasing of those converted, changed, altered, modified, improved properties. But by taking a farm and saying, I'm not going to farm anymore, I'm going to sell the land off, a subdivider then says, okay, I'll pay whatever it is, and they might pay $10,000 an acre, $8,000 an acre, $12,000 an acre, and they might pay for it based upon the current value of soybeans or corn per bushel or something, but they're looking at it really in terms of what can I get out of it if I carve it up, put in improvements, and sell it off as a series of smaller lots. That's the art and science of subdivision. Development is just, you know, it kind of relates to the two. A lot of subdividers are developers. They, you know, the developer is sort of the bigger hat that covers the whole thing. Some home builders, if they buy their own lots, basically, are developers. I tend to think of real estate developers as people who, like, you know, put the Jewel Osco in down here at Galena in 47. But developers come in all sorts of stripes. Again, a true entrepreneur who's not necessarily a broker within the real estate industry would be a real estate developer. There may also be an architect because developers need to be involved in design. They may be a builder. That's a great skill for a developer. They might be a broker because they know leasing. Usually a developer has one of those skills and then applies it in a way of making significant money. The most well-known real estate developer in the country, at least right now, is Donald Trump. Maybe not because of his real estate activities, but that's what he does. You know, buys a piece of land, tears down what's there, puts something up new, that's a developer. The big money in real estate, if your goal here is all about money, there's more money in development over time than there is in anything else. Being the property owner is where the big money is. Assuming that you're successful and don't get caught in the downturn we had like in 06, 07, that killed even the most prominent and successful entities. That, you know, because of the nature of borrowing a lot of money against real estate, that hurt a lot of people. A lot of very successful have more money than I'll ever have kind of people. But that's sort of a one-off, one time in your life, hopefully, kind of experience that I've seen. Home inspectors, we'll talk for about 5 minutes about what a home inspector does and how that relates to us. That's much more mechanical kind of job, having a trades background, you know, knowing when is a heat exchanger in good shape and when is it, when should it be replaced on your furnace. That's a completely different thing. But it is good for a real estate broker to understand the role of an inspector and what they do. Counseling is another area. There's been a lot of counseling over the last 8 years with the recession and then the kind of the mess that followed. Counseling, in most cases, if you're getting paid, still requires a real estate license. There's all kinds of education. So look at me, I make my living as an educator more than anything. Some years I can make just as much money doing real estate part-time as I make here at the college. But if I had to choose, this is what I do. And so, you know, there are opportunities. There are some brokers who will sometimes make money becoming continuing education instructors. A lot of different possibilities, but usually not a lot of money in education.
Again, a lot more money in being an agent who lists and sells or who leases or manages property than there is in something like this. Auctions, this is becoming a bigger deal. Sometimes it's estates, sometimes it's a bank or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac at HomePath, where they're tired of reducing the price of the house, so they finally just say, screw it, put it at a lower number, we're going to have an auction, and hopefully the price will get bid up much higher. I've been to a number of real estate auctions, and the one thing I will tell you is that everybody expects to do the same thing at an auction. When you go to an auction as a prospective buyer, what do you expect to pay? What kind of a deal do you expect to get? A good deal, pay a low price. So what does that mean people typically do at auctions? They overpay. Because they go in there and it's just another $100. Oh, it's just another $100. Oh, it's just another $100. I went to an auction with a commercial client, an institutional client really. Nonprofit wanted to buy a school in DuPage County. And so we went to this auction. An old school in Lombard was being auctioned off. It ended up being purchased by an Islamic school. This was maybe 10, 12 years ago. This was another school that I was representing. And we got registered and we went. And at the very beginning she said, are we going to bid? I said, not yet. So we just watched the bidding go, and within about 30 minutes, the bidding was higher than what they were willing to pay. So she turned to me and she said, aren't we ever going to bid? And I turned to her and said, what's the point? Why would we bid just to drive the price up for everybody else or for ourselves? So out of all of these savvy people who were there to buy the property, they ended up bidding the property up and it sold for quite a bit more than what I think anybody expected. And of course, the people who bought it were all excited because they were exhilarated because they'd just been through this chase of the dollars driving it up. Again, my experience at auctions work really well if you can't sell a property otherwise, and in many cases, done right, staged right, real property auctions will bring more money than somebody would sanely pay if they had time to really think about what they were doing. All right, so anyway, these slides are available to you. You can just sort of read that stuff and come across it. There's a whole list of organizations in here. I'm not going to go through all of these. The one thing I do want to point out, and that is the term realtor. This term realtor, or realtor as most people say it, is a trademark term. It's a made-up word. It doesn't really, it's not an English language word. And it belongs to the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, as people in the industry call it. So if you are thinking, yeah, I'm going to go to this class so I can become a realtor, well, technically that's not correct. You're coming to the class so you can become a real estate broker. And once licensed as a broker, you can act as someone's agent. Whether you choose to become a realtor or not comes down to whether you join a realtor association. I happen to be a member of NAR and for a couple of years belonged to the board of directors of a couple of the different local realtor associations. But that's a practical decision because I wanted MLS access and wanted the certain membership benefits. So again, I just want to point out that if you're asked any questions about becoming a realtor anywhere along the line, here or at the state exam, that's probably never the right answer. Because this is not about being a member in an organization. It's not about knowing the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. It's good to know it exists, but that's an industry issue. That's a membership issue, not a license law, not a licensing kind of deal. Lots of organizations you can belong to if you really want to. Lots of ways to go broke in this business, including joining too many associations that can't do anything for you. All right, let's talk about some real property definitions, and we'll define real property itself in our next class. The 2 or 3 at the top are the most important, particularly residential and commercial. So let me just clarify, as I partially said before, this course will mostly be taught from the perspective of residential real estate. That's what most people here will understand, and that's easiest to put the context around what we're looking at and we're talking about in most cases. But we can define residential real estate the way that the law most often defines residential real estate, and that's as 1, 2, 3, or 4 units of housing. So if you have a 5-unit or larger building, that's typically not considered residential, even if it's all apartments. It's considered part of commercial real estate, and it's regulated or legislated differently. There's maybe one exception I can think of, and I won't address it now, but in almost all cases, legislation that is designed to protect people who are buying and selling residential real estate or financing residential real estate is aimed at transactions up to 4 units. Over 5 units, you're considered a big boy or girl, and you're not going to get the same legislative protection. I literally was at a real estate closing a number of years ago. I was representing the seller, and it was a 5-unit property. And there's this law called RESPA, we'll talk about later, that mandates that a certain disclosure is given by the lenders to the borrowers on residential transactions. This was 4 units of housing and a storefront, which made it a 5-unit property, which took it outside of RESPA. And even the attorney for the buyer was perplexed as to why his buyer didn't have a good faith estimate from the lender. The buyers literally, this deal closed in Joliet, and their bank was the First National Bank of Mazan. I think it was about 40 minutes away. They literally had to leave the closing and go to the bank and come back with like an additional $5,000 or $10,000 because they never knew how much money it was going to take to close the transaction. Their broker presumed wrongly that the lender would tell them by giving them this estimate of all their closing costs. Their attorney never cautioned them that, hey, by the way, this isn't a residential deal. Your bank's probably not going to tell you what kind of cash you're going to need to close this deal. You and your broker are going to have to figure this out, or you're going to have to ask your lender to help you. And so our closing was delayed about an hour and a half while these people went and did what I thought everybody should have been able to figure out ahead of time. So there's a big marked difference here, even if it's an all residence use property, between what we're going to call residential and what we're going to call multifamily, which is a part of the bigger sort of commercial definition. Now, typically when I use the term commercial, I'm thinking office and retail. Those are the biggest sections of commercial real estate. Multifamily is apartment buildings, and we can separate that out pretty clearly. And then there's industrial real estate. Now, commercial and industrial as one big batch, I'll talk about that as well. A lot of times that broad brush will be enough for what we need to define things. But the industrial real estate business is very different than the office or than the retail. They cycle differently, the tenants are different, the rent ranges are different, the construction types are different. Daniel, so we talk about what Daniel talked about, building precast buildings. The huge, industrial is almost all nothing but huge high bay precast buildings. Big, huge spans so that you can store a bunch of stuff to the ceiling, 50, 60, 70 feet high, whatever. Automated racking systems, conveyors, heavy concrete floors, sometimes super flat floors, so that they literally are, hardly out of flat at all because you don't want a forklift with too much weight, 70 feet in the air, tipping over because, the floor was a little bit out of level. Something that wouldn't matter at a low level matters at a high level. Completely different animal. However, for us, in many cases, we just need to say, oh, yeah, it's commercial industrial, and that's going to be different than residential because of the way the laws work. So we won't try and turn this into a commercial and industrial real estate class, but there are times when either some of you will have interest, ask the questions, I'll answer them if I can, or when I just need to sort of differentiate, the non-residential part of real estate from what else we're talking about. So, agricultural we'll probably talk about for all of 5 or 10 minutes, unless you have questions or anybody else here has, because we'll talk a little bit about farm leases on Thursday night this week. But after that, unless we're talking about subdividing it or doing something else, we're not really looking at agricultural land uses. Though, again, it can come up, it's perfectly acceptable. Special purpose is usually kind of unique, a church, a school, hospitals, that kind of thing. And mixed use is any building that has mixed uses in it or any development. The building that I manage, my building as I like to call it, even though I have about 15 partners, is mixed office and retail and school. All right, so the market, the real estate market. Real estate, it's very important to understand, is a very local thing. Very local. There is no such thing as a national real estate market. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a statewide real estate market. There's not even really a countywide or citywide real estate market. Markets are as local as you can possibly stand to define them. And it's going to depend a little bit on who your buyers, sellers, tenants, landlords are, but it's very much a local kind of thing. So when we're looking at the market, we have to know how narrowly we're defining it. If you have property out here in some areas, you're probably still in a buyer's market. there are places in Chicago or closer into the city where the jobs are and where businesses continue to move downtown, near north, that sort of thing, where it's been a seller's market for years. So even across our Chicagoland area, or even the difference between where I live in Glen Ellen and where some of you may live, Yorkville, Plano, completely different markets, right? So let's just define this basic idea. What does it mean to have a buyer's market? Why do we call it that? What's happening that it's a buyer's market? Well, say it louder for us. Okay, so in a buyer's market, who's got the upper hand? The buyer. And the buyer has the upper hand because what is going on with that market at the time? And why are prices low?
Supply.
There's more supply.
Yeah, there's too much inventory for the number of buyers, or the inventory that's there isn't particularly attractive or as attractive as it maybe should be, or something else, whatever. There's just, you know. So in a buyer's market, you've got this oversupply, so the prices will go down. Even if they haven't gone down yet, they may. 3 people in the market, 1 buyer, 3 people on a particular subdivision who are trying to sell, all of whom are retiring, all of whom are wanting to get the hell out of Illinois because of this problem or another, and they really want to go, and you got 1 buyer who's interested, and they're all at the same house, the same price. How many of them does it take to drop their price to, just 1? All 1 of them has to do is blink, right, and go, oh, I don't really need 230, I'll take 210, I want to leave. And bam, you have that shift in the market. Now, as we're going to look at later in the course, recent sales underpin the value of future sales. So when you get a bunch of drop in prices like we've had recently with the recession, etc., it tends to drop the value of homes, even if the remaining buyers are like, nah, I'm not budging. I'm not going to take less than 230 or 240. It may not matter because now the buyers know somebody will sell our house like this for 210. We're just going to keep going until we find somebody who will sell it to us for that price. So that's the basic idea of a buyer's market, right? I mean, the buyer's command. So what's a seller's market then? What has to happen for a market to shift from a buyer's market to a seller's market? What do we have to all of a sudden have a lot of people looking for? Housing, or that kind of property, right? And that's going to happen because interest rates drop, because all of a sudden there are actually jobs, or because people feel better, or because the market shifted because all the other houses have since sold and now there's only 1 guy left and there's 3 people looking to buy a house in the subdivision. And again, this varies a lot. In some markets, when there's new construction, the builders will be moving along at a very fast pace. People are buying the new construction and that subdivision is just booming. And the older subdivision with the same size houses and the same number of bedrooms and the same number of bathrooms across the street may not be selling at all, or vice versa, because they're offering slightly different features, right? If Jeff builds a house that's so much superior to every other competitor because he's found some new design and he's the only one who's kind of figured out this is what people really want in their house, he can have his stuff booming and the other builders are struggling for work. This can happen in a market. It's very, very, very specific. Again, value is driven by demand because demand gets back to this whole supply and demand equation. So when you're trying to look at it, this is the major error that people made in 2004, 5, 6, and 7. Although by 7, I think we had mostly figured it out. What's driving the demand? And is that demand sustainable? So who was buying a full 35% of all residential real estate in about 2004 and 2005? What group of people? Well, it was investors, is what was happening. So by 2005, we had people who were buying investments, never intended to live there. But they knew how much money people were making in real estate. Here's what was happening. Let me just give you a snapshot of 2 different examples of how this worked. And this isn't even really sort of buying and selling real estate, but it is. So let's talk about Trump Towers. We're talking about the Donald here or whatever. I hate that guy. No, I don't really. He's a human being and he deserves respect, but I didn't like him when he was only a real estate developer. So we built this 92-foot or 92-story, mixed-use building on the river. It's a gorgeous development. The letters are taller than all of us if we stand up together. Have you seen the name Trump across the building? Okay, so how long do you suppose it takes to build a structural steel framed 92-story building once you break ground and top out and finish the top?
5 years.
I'm going to guess about 3. Add for permitting and planning and everything, it could very well be a 5-year timeline. So let's say that this building is going to open in whatever 2005. In 2000, we start talking about it. Everybody gets excited. Ooh, it's the new Trump Tower, whatever it's called. And so they start the pre-sales, and let's say that a particular condo unit we're going to buy is $300,000. So in order to buy a $300,000 condo a year before the thing breaks ground and 3 years before we're going to occupy it, maybe we put down a $30,000 deposit. That would be a big deposit. But maybe that's what we do. Earnest money of a sort. Now, in general, with real estate values, forgetting 2006 through whatever, 2011, 2012, which direction do real estate values tend to go, up or down? Up, slowly sometimes, and sometimes in fits and starts, but over a long period of time, they traject up. So at this point in time in our history, places are increasing in value at the rate of around 10%, especially in a high demand building like Trump's. Now, if we were having this conversation in California, at this time, markets were increasing at 20 to 25% per year. The norm is 2% per year over the history of the United States. In Las Vegas, year over year, the highest on record from 04 to 05, 1 year increase for the same stinking house, 51%. The builders just kept raising the prices. These are Jeff's evil twins who are out there, not the saintly Mr. Williams. But no, the big builders were saying, wow, we got more demand than we can handle. Why don't we just keep increasing the price until people start screaming? So the builders literally pushed the prices so much in 1 year for the same houses in the same subdivision, 51% increase. The highest previous to that had been in California, and everything weird happens in California, was 30-some%. So if you're getting 10% a year here, all right, let's look at this. You start off in year 0 when you buy this at $300,000. You got then year 1, 2, 3 before you're going to occupy. You not only have to add the $30,000 per year at 10% per year, it's going to go up. You got to compound that, right? Because if it's 300, then it's 330, then it's going to go to 363. So let's just say you paid $300 for this condo, and 3 years later, it's now worth $400. It's a bit over 10%, but it's pretty close, and it sells better if I exaggerate a little bit. So if you, math question, pop quiz, if you buy something here for $300,000 and you decide not to close on it, you never close on the condo at all, you sell the contract to somebody else, a coworker, a friend, whatever, for $400,000, how much money did you make? What was the, what was the percentage return on investment here? That's what I want you to tell me. What's approximately the percentage return on investment on this deal? Does that seem to make sense? A third increase?
$30,000 to be 70.
Perfect. So, actually you made 100. You made 100. But Daniel's got it right. You didn't put in $300,000 because you never closed on the place. You only put up 30. And you sold it and you netted 100. Your return is over 3 times. This is what some investors were doing. They were going into the new construction market, never intending to occupy these places, just flipping the contracts. Buying a new construction house in Las Vegas, knowing it was a year delivery because the builders were so crazy busy, and flipping that contract for a 20, 25, 30% profit in a year, and never actually closing on the real estate itself. This was the giddy frenzy of 04 and 05 and 06 in some markets, like downtown Chicago condos or Miami condos or in other certain places. Stunning returns. And when the average individual goes, oh my God, everybody can make money on real estate, you need to look at what's underlying that demand. Because if 35% of your market is people who are never going to occupy, At some point in time, you look around and go, oh, the emperor has no clothes. There's nothing behind the curtain. The market is complete illusion, and that's what we had. People say, oh, it was all these greedy low-income people who had these adjustable rate mortgages. All bullshit. It was this. It was those of us who said, I'm going to put down 30 grand and I'm going to buy this place and I'm just going to wake up in a couple of years and I'm going to have a ton of money. A third of the market or slightly more at its peak were people buying properties, residential real estate properties, who never intended to occupy them. Never. Never happened in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate market tanked and recovered in 2 years. It took residential, what, 6, 7, 8, in some places. I guess I would argue Yorkville, Plano haven't recovered yet. Because we don't have any jobs yet out here, right? I mean, who's going to open a factory and employ 1,000 workers or something that we need to create the demand? And with shifting work demographics, more jobs are going downtown. Downtown market and Chicago market's pretty healthy. So back to this idea of, the market, right? Forces going on in the market. We'll talk a little more about this. Properties are unique. We'll touch on this again Thursday night. Once a property is somewhere, it can't be moved. So, it is where it is. And this whole local thing, I'll give you a couple of examples here. I mentioned this one subdivision already, but let's talk about really local by using a downtown condo sort of example. How many are familiar with like the Aqua, the really cool shaped 80, 90-story, well maybe 60, 80-story condo building at Millennium Park in Chicago? Got a lot of write-ups, Genie Gang and studios design. Very cool looking building. Looks like waving water there as it stands there. Top floor of that building might go for, and the condos that are up there, $4 million a piece, $5 million a piece. Pretty big units. They probably sell for well over $1,000 a square foot. 10 times per square foot what the typical existing house would sell for here, Aurora, North Aurora, Geneva, that kind of thing. High-end finishes, of course. In fact, how many of you remember hearing about the failed Spire project? 2,000-foot tall condo building that's now never going to get built. Ty Warner, who knows who Ty Warner is? The inventor of Beanie Babies? Before the Spire never actually broke ground on the foundation. Ty Warner bought he bought the contract, he's got his money back, I'm sure. He paid for the condo on the top floor, 1 unit on the top floor. $40 million is what he had agreed to pay to be 2,000 feet in the air to have the premier condo overlooking the lake and downtown Chicago in the city. A lot of Beanie Babies. Let's go down to the bottom floor in the Spire, where you got a studio, and it doesn't face the lake. It faces Lakeshore Drive, heavy traffic. Maybe maybe it's next to the laundry room. Same postage stamp piece of property, same tiny little piece of property in Chicago, only separated by vertical dimensions. Are those in the same market? The $40 million top floor and the $250,000 studio on the lower floor? Mm-hmm. No. And imagine how many markets there are in every high-rise in Chicago. They're getting more local than being on the same piece of property, yet there are tons of different markets in those vertical communities. So this is what happens. Even in a subdivision, the townhouses are a different market than the single-family detached houses. They have different buyers, different sellers, different purposes. Who's buying and why? Is the market strong? Is it weak? That's something that an agent should know. If you're going to represent people, how do you represent their best interests if you don't know for sure whether you're in a buyer's market, a seller's market, moderate market, trending up, trending down, good time to buy, good time to wait? I will suggest to you several times during the course that it's helpful to specialize. If you live, work, as many of you have said, in Geneva, and you're going to do real estate right around there, if you all of a sudden take somebody to Yorkville for the first time and you don't know that much about it, it's going to be hard for you to be an expert because you just don't know the market, and vice versa. You can have been in the business for a long time and all of a sudden you lose your expert status because you don't know that particular market or subdivision. Again, market's extremely local. It's probably the single most important lesson to take out of this when it comes to real estate. Local, by far, is more accurate. I put up here technological advancements just to point it out. The industry is changing a lot. Some people are getting out of the business because there's a lot more technology. For those of you who are technologically savvy or into social media and other things, feel free to connect with me on Facebook after you're out of the class and get licensed. I love seeing former students marketing their houses or whatever. pretty soon my entire feed is gonna be taken up with why I should buy this house or that one or whatever. But it's common, it's a way, something for people to do. Technology has changed that a lot. And these changes then matter. If more telecommuting were possible, more people could live farther out. You could live in Leland, and your job could be in New York, much less in Chicago. And that would change the demographic and change the traffic patterns and who could live where. The last downturn dramatically affected some of the areas out here, and again, they still haven't recovered. So understand that to the greatest degree that you can. All right, just one last thing on these sets of slides that you're welcome to look at for whatever you want. I just kind of recapped here briefly other courses that we offer here at Wavansie, and we'll talk about these again in more detail later when it matters to you again. So I mentioned Real Estate 105, this broker pre-license applied principles. That's the follow-on companion course to this one. Once you become licensed in your first renewal period, you need to complete broker post-license courses, which we offer here at Wavansie, though not all the time. And we call them Real Estate 115 and 116. So please consider that. You would come back to Wavansie and take your post-license courses from us or from me or whatever. If you decide to become a managing broker licensee one day, I hope that we can offer these courses more frequently. It's hard for us to get enough students to run them, but they are in the catalog, and I do hope to start trying to run them again next year. So we'll see how that works. And then there's other stuff you can learn. We teach courses in other things that might help you in your real estate career. Then after this is just a bunch of slides on if you're looking at, getting a baccalaureate degree or even a master's degree eventually. These are all the programs that are in the Chicago area that are real estate specific. Chicago has more graduate real estate degree programs, I swear, than any other city in the world. 5 of them. 5 master's degrees in real estate in Chicago. 15 years ago, 0. So it shows that. So one of them is at DePaul. DePaul offers the only baccalaureate degree in real estate. Pricey school, but one of the country's largest private universities. The Realtor Association now has an unaccredited, but they're working on accreditation, Master of Real Estate program online, beginning a dialogue with them to see if we can somehow help students who don't have college degrees take the right coursework here, earn a baccalaureate degree, and then be best prepared to enter into their MRE program. I'm kind of intrigued that the association is offering that. You probably learn a lot of very specific stuff to what you do at a school like that. They also offer CE courses and things, not for credit. Roosevelt has a couple of degree options. I have their MSRE degree. A lot of big developers involved at Roosevelt. I also hold the MS in real estate law at John Marshall. Very few people study that. I've studied more real estate law than most attorneys, mostly because it fills in gaps here for me. U of I Chicago, U of I Urbana-Champaign. We'll talk a little bit later in the course about this idea of urban planning, but very little. And this is an area of real estate that's not transactional. It's all about planning your cities and counties, traffic flows, quality of life, that kind of thing. It's a real estate discipline, but it's different. And I think that's what I got for you for tonight. Questions about anything at all?